The strongest earthquake anywhere on Earth in 2026 just hit the fastest subduction zone on the planet. And the only thing that stopped a mass casualty event was 237 kilometers of rock. At 5:38 p.m. local time on March 24th, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck 153 kilometers west of Neiafu, Tonga's second-largest town. The USGS measured the depth at 237.5 kilometers. That is roughly 22 commercial jet cruising altitudes stacked straight down into the earth. 20,000 people felt moderate shaking. Within minutes, tsunami sirens were sounding across the island chain. Tonga's National Disaster Risk Management Office posted a single instruction on Facebook: move immediately to higher ground. Avoid beaches, avoid shorelines, avoid low-lying coastal areas. Evacuations from the Nuku'alofa waterfront began almost immediately. In Neiafu, people ran from the harbor toward the hills above the town. On outer islands across the Vava'u group, families moved inland on foot. At 5:05 UTC, roughly 28 minutes after the main shock, NOAA's Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii issued its bulletin. The determination, no tsunami warning, advisory, watch, or threat in effect. The earthquake was too deep inside the earth to displace the seafloor, but Tonga's own warning system was not waiting for Hawaii. The local response had already been activated. The Fua'amotu Tsunami Warning Center was already tracking tide gauge readings. At 6:30 p.m. local, a 1-foot wave was detected at Neiafu Harbor. 1 foot. That was the only wave recorded. Tonga Meteorological Services canceled the tsunami warning for Tonga Tapu, the Niuas, Ha'apai, and Ua at 7:18 p.m. In Vava'u remained under warning for longer. Across the Tasman Sea, New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency assessed the event with GNS science and confirmed no tsunami threat to New Zealand. A wave would have taken at least 2 hours to arrive if one had been generated. Later that evening, Tonga's NDRMO declared the all clear and stood down the National Emergency Operations Center. Communities were told to return from evacuation zones, but to remain cautious. No verified deaths, no major structural damage reported. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii said there was no tsunami threat because the earthquake was located too deep inside the earth. That depth, 237.5 kilometers, is the entire story, because the system that produced this earthquake is not quiet, it is not stable. It is the most seismically active subduction zone on the planet. The Tonga Trench runs for 2,550 kilometers along the boundary where the Pacific Plate dives beneath the Australian Plate at speeds reaching 24 centimeters per year. That is roughly 4 times faster than the San Andreas Fault moves. One researcher at Michigan State University described the region in blunt terms. Tonga hosts 2/3 of all deep earthquakes in the world. 2/3, not of the Pacific, of the entire planet. In the 7 days before the main shock, the Tonga region had already produced a cluster of moderate to major earthquakes. An M6.3 and an M6.2 struck on March 22nd at depths of just 10 kilometers, shallow enough to move the seafloor. An M5.9 followed the same day. An M5.8 hit on March 23rd. Then the M7.6 arrived, deeper, stronger, and right at the heart of the descending slab. The quake was the largest anywhere in the world since an M7.6 struck off the coast of Japan on December 8, 2025. The biggest of 2025 was an M8.8 near Russia's Kamchatka region, which triggered tsunami warnings across the Pacific, including Hawaii and the U.S. mainland. Tonga's M7.6 produced a 1-foot wave and a Facebook post. The only difference was depth. The Tonga-Kermadec system does not behave like other subduction zones. The Pacific Plate enters the trench as some of the oldest oceanic lithosphere on Earth, more than 120 million years old, cold, dense, and heavy enough to sink almost vertically. Behind the trench, the Lau Basin is actively spreading apart at rates up to 160 millimeters per year. The combined effect is a subduction velocity that accelerates from roughly 150 millimeters per year in the south to 240 in the north. That makes the northern Tonga Trench the fastest plate consumption boundary anywhere on the planet. Along that boundary sit roughly 80 submarine volcanoes. Most have never been continuously monitored. Song Chiao Wei, an endowed assistant professor of geological sciences at Michigan State University, told MSU Today that monitoring submarine volcanoes is feasible but costly. That single sentence holds the entire problem. Feasible but costly. So it does not get done, and what does not get done eventually arrives as a surprise. On September 29, 2009, an M8.1 earthquake struck south of Samoa, 40 kilometers east of the Tonga Trench. It was one of the largest normal fault earthquakes ever recorded. The tsunami it generated reached 22 meters, 72 feet, on some coastlines. 192 people died across Samoa, American Samoa, and Tonga. On the Tongan island of Neiafu, 500 people were displaced. On January 15, 2022, the Tonga Ha'apai submarine volcano erupted in what the World Bank later described as a once-in-a-thousand-year event. The eruption created an ash plume at least 30 kilometers high and 260 kilometers wide. It sent a pressure wave around the globe that was detected by barometers on every continent. The tsunami reached the west coast of the Americas, from Alaska to Chile. 3 people died in Tonga. Reuters reported that all the homes on one of Tonga's small outer islands were destroyed. The ashfall and tsunami affected 85% of the Tongan population directly, damaging houses, schools, roads, power systems, and water supply networks. The undersea communications cable connecting Tonga to the outside world was severed. The country went dark for weeks. The World Bank assessed total damages and losses at $182 million, 36.4% of the country's entire GDP. More than a third of the national economy erased by a single volcanic event from below the waterline. Tonga's finance minister said the multiple disasters had created an unanticipated financing gap and emphasized the urgent need to accelerate building national resilience. Since 2018, natural disasters, including Tropical Cyclone Gita, Tropical Cyclone Harold, and the Hunga eruption, had caused an estimated $457 million in damages and losses for Tonga. That is nearly the entire GDP of the country, absorbed in repeated blows over less than 5 years. Those two precedents, 2009 and 2022, are the reason a 1-foot wave at Neiafu in 2026 is not reassurance. It is a margin. On June 2, 2022, 4 months after the Hunga eruption had already demonstrated exactly how exposed Tonga was, the World Bank published a project document identifying a total financing gap of $3.50 million in Tonga's multi-hazard early warning system. That included $1.15 million for seismic and observation upgrades and $1.6 million for a national multi-hazard early warning center. The document noted that earlier building designs for the warning center were, in its own words, not fit for purpose. $3.50 million. For the country that sits on the fastest subduction zone on Earth, the country that lost a third of its GDP to a single eruption. The country where 2/3 of the planet's deep earthquakes originate. The warning system that was supposed to protect 100,000 people from the next event had a financing gap smaller than the cost of a single luxury home in Auckland. The IMF had already flagged the same structural weakness 2 years earlier, noting that Tonga lacked a fully integrated multi-hazard early warning system and needed more resources for critical agencies. The meteorological services had experienced growth in demand but lacked specialized staff. There was, the IMF said, a lack of clarity between the ministries responsible for hazard monitoring, early warning, and preparedness. Under the World Bank's Pacific Resilience Program, emergency operating centers had been built in Ha'apai and Vava'u, the same island groups closest to the March 24th earthquake. Those centers were activated during the 2022 eruption and used high-frequency radios and emergency stockpiles funded by the program. The infrastructure exists, it has been tested, but the broader system, the seismic observation network, the submarine monitoring, the National Warning Center itself, was still being scaled toward a 2030 deadline when the M7.6 hit. Leitia Fifita, director of the Tonga Meteorological Service, framed the ambition clearly. The goal, he said, is to develop and make operational an effective multi-hazard early warning system for Tonga by 2030. By 2030. The M7.6 arrived in 2026. 4 years before the system it was supposed to stress test was designed to be complete. On March 24th, that incomplete system was activated. The NDRMO issued the coastal evacuation. The Meteorological Service tracked the wave. A 1-foot reading came in from Neiafu. The warning was lifted within roughly an hour and 40 minutes. The Emergency Operations Center stood down. No one died. But the critical weakness remains geographic. The hazard zone is offshore. Seafloor instruments cost roughly 10 times more than land-based monitoring stations. The 80 submarine volcanoes along the Tonga-Kermadec arc are not being watched in real time. The slab descending beneath the islands is doing so at a speed no other subduction zone on Earth can match, and the monitoring architecture meant to track what happens next is still being built under a policy framework that targets full operational capability 4 years from now. The March 24th earthquake released its energy 237.5 kilometers below the surface. That depth absorbed the worst of it, a 1-foot wave. No confirmed casualties, no structural damage reported. The system responded, the warning went out, people moved to higher ground, and the all clear came before midnight. But depth is not a feature anyone controls. The next earthquake on the Tonga Trench could rupture at 10 kilometers, the same depth as the M6.3 that struck 2 days earlier. At that depth, the seafloor moves. At that depth, the wave is not 1 foot. The 2009 M8.1 ruptured at shallow depth, 40 kilometers east of the trench. 72-foot waves, 192 dead. The difference between that outcome and March 24th was not preparation. It was not warning infrastructure. It was not policy. It was geometry. 237 kilometers of rock absorbed the energy that would otherwise have displaced the ocean above it. And Tonga sits on a subduction zone that has produced 40 earthquakes above magnitude 7.5 since 1900. The slab beneath the islands is accelerating. The back arc basin behind it is pulling apart. 80 submarine volcanoes line the boundary, and most are not monitored in real time. The warning system designed to protect this country is still 4 years from full operational capability, and the financing gap that was identified in 2022 was for the system as it was then, not as it needs to be now. The March 24th earthquake was deep. The warning went out. People moved. The wave was 1 foot. The all clear came before midnight. Everything worked. This time, everything worked because the rupture happened 237 kilometers below the surface. The question is not if the next one will be shallower. The question is when. The question is not if. The question is when.